Before you go, what a day it's been, and I really do hope you have had a good day today and you've enjoyed the event so far and have taken something from this event today. When we were planning for today, we wanted to ensure that as many voices as possible could be heard. When we were going through the process of selecting the type of person we wanted for keynote speaker here today, we knew it needed to be somebody who still wasn't quite convinced. Somebody who wasn't from the traditional nationalist community, somebody who was part of the crucial undecided middle. That person needed to be open to change, open to persuasion and broad-minded when it came to deciding what's best for our future and the future of our children and our grandchildren. As people in favour of constitutional change, we need to be generous and we need to listen. We need to have as many conversations as we can with our unionist friends, work colleagues and neighbours. We need to extend ourselves where and when possible. We need to be prepared to be challenged. And ultimately, society in the South must say to Northern Unionism, we want you. Today's keynote speaker will be known to everybody in this room, and we want to thank him sincerely for coming here today and sharing his thoughts with us. When the referendum comes, it will be people like Jimmy Nesbitt, people who are currently undecided but who want a better future for all, that we need placing an X beside the box for a new and united Ireland. Everybody, please give a very warm, friendly applause to one of our well-known performers. Please put your hands together for Jimmy Nesbitt.
Thank you. Well, of course, I had to follow Mary Lou. Good afternoon, Giadiva Aharga. I'd like to thank my personal Irish language tutor, Declan O'Groyne, for that. He's here today. So the discussions today have been fascinating and insightful. Now you've got me. Apologies if I echo a lot of what has already been said today. I hope it's not repeating. I hope it's reinforcing. But I am humbled and delighted to have been invited to contribute to this important dialogue on the broad theme of Together We Can, and how the people of this island might come to a common understanding of the future relationship of the people here, and indeed the relationship between the nations and regions that go to make up the British Isles. I'm also bloody terrified, not least because at this stage of my career, I'm probably Northern Ireland's longest serving police officer. I do not promote one solution over the other, but I do consider that an informed debate based on clear evidence needs to happen. It needs to examine what health services, financial modelling, sport and so on would look like in various scenarios. Before I do that, I thought it would be useful to give you an insight into my background. Now, some of you will know me as a shy, unassuming, multi-award winning actor, but why am I here? Why does this discussion matter to me? Well, I am a Northern Ireland Protestant. I was born in a small village in County Antrim called Brishin. It was a very Protestant area and unionist, but my father, who was the local primary school headmaster, sent my three sisters and me to St Louis Convent in Ballymena to learn the piano. I think Dad was a bit of a torchbearer without realising it. And I think it was also about sending out a message, even then, that there could be integration. That said, in my youth, I played in a flute band, I marched, but I didn't really think anything of it. Brishin was by no means at the heart of the Troubles. It was very easy to grow up with the Troubles just up the road and feel distance from them. So I was brought up as a Protestant, but my key driver was to be an actor, and I was supported by this, by my family. When I was 19, I moved to England. Now, I went very much as a Protestant, but the first day I went to drama school, there was an automatic assumption that I was pro-republicanism. Not because anything I said or did, but because I was being considered Irish for the first time, in a sense. And that maybe made me begin to consider myself as Irish. I think for a lot of Protestants, particularly in my generation, when we went away, it was quite a shock that we were regarded as Irish by others, particularly the English, who don't really distinguish between North and South. Playing Ivan Cooper in Bloody Sunday was cathartic for me. It was maybe the first time that I examined the power of my job, and I examined the place I came from, its complex history, and the relationship between these islands. The truth about Bloody Sunday was not something I had been aware of. I think, to a certain degree, Protestants were taught history with a British perspective, and Catholics were taught with an Irish perspective. But I suppose I grew to understand Northern Ireland better through my work in Northern Ireland. The director of Bloody Sunday, Paul Greengrass, always used to say that for any Irish actor, from the North particularly, the Troubles is a responsibility, meaning that at some point we must engage both artistically and personally. I began to realise what the power of my job could do, but also in a way why I love where I come from. It's about love and responsibility. One of the best love affairs I've had in my life has been with home. It's incredible in a place where there remains such division that actually people here are so united about loving where they come from. If we could just get hold of that, we could really go places. Harnessing this love of home is a key part of my ambition for change, and for that change to happen through a fully inclusive, non-sectarian conversation about the kind of society Northern Ireland wants to be, regardless of its constitutional status. When I first got involved with the Connected Citizens initiative with Conor Houston, Eamon Mullen and the late, great Jim Dornan, Jim was passionate about and committed to a shared island, and he's a great loss to the debate. When I became involved, Jim would have loved that. When I became involved, it was out of a sense of frustration, maybe even anger, that we were not making the progress that the Good Friday Belfast Agreement promised, the so-called peace dividend. The day I gave an interview to Freya McClements of the Irish Times a few years ago, I had just presided over a series of graduation ceremonies, young people full of hope for the future. Now, when I talked to those young people, they were saying that it rarely comes up in conversation, the differences that plagued my generation and many generations past. I think we really are at an important moment where we can actually begin to escape all that. We're ready to have this debate in the public domain, even if at times it seems our politicians are not. Now, in saying that, I'm not a politician. I'm not being critical. Politicians have a challenging role in any context, and I admire those who put themselves up for public office. But I firmly believe that we need to bring this discussion out of the Dáil, out of Stormont, out of Whitehall, out of academic fora, and into the town halls, the village halls, the church halls, the orange halls. My point is, I think that any change must be people-led, and solutions cannot be forced on those people. If we should have learned anything from history, we should have learned that. Solutions must emerge from a public discussion of the options for the future constitutional governance of the island and its relationships with our friends in the rest of the British Isles and in the European Union. I would also include in that discussion the Irish diaspora across the world, a debate I don't believe we've ever had. Politicians may point to political mandate, giving them the power and responsibility to lead, but people can only vote for what is in front of them on the ballot paper. I believe that it's time to ask wider society, outside of the ballot box, what way it wants to be governed. We need to focus on the full diversity of society on this island and the connections we enjoy north and south as well as east-west across these islands. Now, I've added a few strands to these relationships earlier, and we should also recognise that we are an increasingly multicultural and multi-ethnic society. I mentioned earlier that the differences that affected our generation and previous generations don't matter to today's young people. The people I mentioned earlier, the Connected Citizens group, we had many differences, and we argued, occasionally over a good glass or bucket of wine. And to be fair, as Brendan Bain said, I only drink on 2 occasions, when I'm thirsty and when I'm not. But people do differ. I understand there may be some people here who don't like bloodlands. Well, you know, that's okay. I mean, it's rude and ridiculous, frankly, but it's okay. But what we did agree on was the need to involve wider society in a discussion about how it wants to be governed. We've for too long focused on the differences that keep us apart and failed to explore the common ground, those views, issues, problems that we share. As a society, we need to build on that common ground, explore what a shared island means, and let any discussion on future constitutional arrangements emerge. Now, a border poll may well be inevitable, but if it's going to happen, let it happen after an informed debate and not just when the numbers are right. This is my key point. The recent census outcomes are interesting, and I know incredibly encouraging for most of you here, me too, but let's not see them as definitive. We're standing at a profound moment here in the history of the islands, and those graduates that I mentioned earlier, they were all about 21, and they are the very first generation who have the potential that no other generation has had, and that is to know a permanent peace and the potential to progress as a society without the constraints of the past. Although my work with Wave Trauma Centre as recently as this week convinces me that there are issues related to victims that still need to be addressed. I'm thinking particularly of the implications of the proposed legacy bill for many of the families of victims and, of course, of the families of the remaining disappeared. Anyway, that year, the year of those graduations, Portrush, where I'm lucky enough to call home, hosted the Open Golf Championship, and we were proud, north and south, to see the great Shane Lowry lift the claret jug, one of our own. Taught him everything he knows, actually. Indeed, sport is a great unifier in so many respects, particularly in sports like rugby. And this time next year, we'll be cheering on the lads as they go for the title in France. Come on, you boys in green. I digress, but my point about the Open was that thousands, tens of thousands, were flocking to the northwest for a massive event. People coming to a place where, when I was growing up, people were encouraged not to come to, and indeed to go away from. That made a lot of us angry, and actually it was one thing I never understood. Why, when it was such an incredible place with such wonderful people, would you not want to come here? I now hold both an Irish and a British passport. I would describe myself as an Irishman from the north of Ireland who in no way refutes nor shies away from my Protestant culture. But it does not define me. But it does not define me, and nor do I deny my Catholic friends their culture. As an aside, I went with Declan O'Groyne to my first ever hurling match in Croke Park in the summer. Jesus, what a game. But it also struck me how much we miss out on by not engaging with other cultures, no more so than here on our island. I think there's a real appetite here now to ensure that that peace transitions into an economic and cultural and social prosperity across the island. What is stopping that? What is stopping that is unquestionably the governing structures. There is still division in the north, and that division is reflected in the nature of our politics and in structures that were essential in bringing about peace, but do not, I believe, lend themselves to progress. Now, of course, it's easy for me to say this. I'm someone who lives in England a good bit of the time. I have a degree of success and wealth and all that. I'm well outside it. But I have never left Ireland. For me, the North. It is my home. I hope no one can accuse me of not being committed to Northern Ireland, and I have truly believed in the roles that I have held as Chancellor of Ulster University, as patron of Wave Trauma Centre and others. I go back to the fact that there's a 5-year-old wee boy from Brisbane in here who actually loves coming back home, who wants to come back home, and would love the notion of somehow being a very small pebble in the very large wall that actually begins to change who is allowed to be involved in terms of deciding the future of the relations between these islands and their peoples and in making progress. The conversation needs to change. The governance structures in the North aren't working. The North's future direction, indeed the future direction of this island, must lie in the hands of its people, not the politicians for now. Leaders of civic society, the health education and arts sectors, industry, business and sport, they need to step up and become more involved in public life, to take responsibility for change, rather than simply bemoaning the status quo or blaming others for the lack of progress. And then when that happens, let politics evolve to take forward the emerging vision. There's no longer room for comments such as that made by Winston Churchill when he said, "We have found the Irish to be somewhat odd. They refuse to be English." Too bloody right. Being Irish is much more complex than being English. As Sigmund Freud said, the Irish are one race for whom psychoanalysis is of no use whatsoever. In part, it is about perspective. I want Northern Ireland to be seen as somewhere that is a progressive society rather than one defined by its past. But in order for that to happen, much must change. The Good Friday Agreement promised that there was going to be a new future for these islands, that there were going to be new relationships built, new institutions. That has not happened. There are many who have found the frequent dormancy of Stormont just so unbearable, unpalatable, embarrassing, frankly, and terrible to renege so heavily on what people voted for in 1998. In the new context, new language is needed, and I speak carefully here. I know my audience. But those words, United Ireland, they need to be analysed, because those two words put together carry such a political connotation, and a connotation which is rather more about emotion than pragmatism. I think one of the great challenges, and actually one of the great opportunities, is to start getting away from language that is incendiary. Now, I suppose to many from my background, talk of a united Ireland is difficult, but the conversation is out there. I prefer something like a new Union of Ireland, where people from the north, particularly those from my tradition, would feel that they have their identity, that it is in no way threatened, that they have an equal voice, that they are part of a society that is progressive, inclusive, diverse, that they have prosperity, that they are not marginalised, and that they can be proud to be from the north of Ireland in a new Union of Ireland. The late, great Irishman John Hume talked of post-nationalism, and he was, I think, referring to our future as European citizens. Jesus, I wish we still were. Now, it was largely misunderstood, particularly within his own community. I thought it was a brave statement and possibly deserved a response that talked of post-unionism. Maybe the time is right now to explore what a world would look like post-unionism and post-nationalism. I know many Northern Protestants are open to this. Among my friends, the Protestant lads, well, I say Protestant lads, we're men in our late 50s staring down the barrel of 60, though not all of us look like it. But they are considering now what the notion of a new Union of Ireland might look like. There's a lot of people like that up there. It's exciting. I am certainly very keen on embracing anything in which the relationship between the people in the north is improved, and between north and south, and between these islands. And it strikes me that I think a lot of more people around my way are coming round to the idea of just even considering themselves Irish. Of course, it's a great shame that Britain voted to leave Europe, the disaster of Brexit. At least there was a unification of sorts there, because we were all part of a different European family. And I think that is what most people are now beginning to challenge, the divided nature of our society. And I think that's the key. I think the people have moved on hugely from where we were, but I'm not sure that politics has moved on as quickly. And I believe we have to offer people alternatives to orange and green. Now, my vision is not born out of politics or indeed politicians. It's stepping outside of politics. And maybe because some of us have a profile, not always that pleasant, we can carry a bit more weight, I don't know. But I do think that there's an appetite for people to actually celebrate the many different identities that there are on this island. It doesn't matter, you can call yourself Irish, British, Northern Irish, European. If you just want to be from Cork or Larne, that's okay too. I'm not comparing Cork and Larne, by the way. Jeez, that's me finishing them both. It just feels that there's been a silent majority in this discussion for far too long. That voice needs to be heard. Let it emerge. Let this opportunity not slip. If you can indulge me just for a few moments, this is the final day of Organ Donation Week, and I want to welcome the Northern Ireland Assembly's decision to introduce Daithí's Law in respect of organ donation. Huge congratulations to Marcin Sef and wee Daki himself. It's hugely significant and it will have such a positive impact on so many people. I will leave you with a traditional and what I hope is an appropriate Irish blessing. May you have the hindsight to know where you've been, the foresight to know where you are going, and the insight to know when you have gone too far. I hope I haven't. Go to Moya. Thank you.